Hello there, welcome back to the Crusader states in stainless steel Abridged. Last time, to help ourselves out against the Fatamids, we started a crusade against them. We ended up still having to fight a decisive battle against their first wave of invading forces. We defeated them and stole the castle at Gaza away from them as a result, and now we're just in the process of dealing with the second wave. We've got another case where the enemy is split into two armies, but the first one, deployed in the corner, it's quite close to its reinforcement point, meaning we can't rush forwards and try to take out that first group real fast like we did in the last part with a similar situation. So while I walk over there for a normal battle, the enemy attacked me with some horse archers. Decided to counter by charging with my heavy cav. In theory it doesn't work, and in practice it really doesn't work because the AI isn't that good at doing the pathfinding and chasing down the enemy, so let alone us probably being slower than them, we're failing to catch up. Also, while this is happening, in the background, through the fog and rain, you might spot that something else is going on. The enemy have sent some cav to charge the front of our main line as it advances. I counter with some cav of my own. Outnumbered, but it stops them from getting a nice charge on my infantry, and my heavy cav are now moving back to go and support that situation, apart from one unit which continued the pursuit and eventually caught up at the edge of the map to these horse archers. Now our knights should do okay bringing them down. Our king is in among them, so hopefully he doesn't die, but I tend to play it fast and loose with that sort of thing, of course. Now our infantry are forming up for a very messy battle with the enemy because their two armies didn't really unite properly before they fought. Some of them are moving across the face of our line as they engage, and indeed we're being hit in the flanks just as much as we're hitting them in the flanks. A nice big mess, but somewhere an enemy general has died, so that's great news. I think it was the captain of the first group that's died rather than the actual general, the enemy prince, who is leading the second group. In fact, that prince is currently stalking my king. I'm doing some micro to try and keep him out of combat, conscious of the fact that I lost a general recently to being attacked by an enemy general. At least the enemy's infantry are in huge trouble because we have a massive cavalry advantage. We can constantly out-micro the enemy and destroy their low-quality units, and with that, the fight was really won without that much effort. Then I was focused on hunting down the enemy commander, but like in the last part, the enemy bamboozled me by being clever. They just withdrew their commander so that I couldn't kill him. That means my quest to get revenge against the enemy by killing their faction heir has failed. I thought maybe because we got more than 85% of the total army killed, he might be deleted, but it doesn't work like that. He just disappears off somewhere into a nearby settlement. So there we go, now we know withdrawing is quite a good way to not get characters killed. We're probably going to use that ourselves at some point. With all that sorted, the Fatamid invasion of the Crusader states is over by the looks of things. They don't have anything else nearby, and we're starting to be able to recruit a few trash units ourselves, so we're slowly getting into the game. In the next turn, even though we haven't really reinforced ourselves at all, I'm going to move out anyway and try to attack that settlement we just saw. If we can take that, our front line will be much less messy. Basically the enemy will be able to come from just the west or the south along two roads, so we can keep control of things a bit nicer. And it's a large town, that means it can potentially recruit things for us if we can get a couple of buildings in there. The only problem is that our army is getting increasingly rubbish as all of our elite units gradually die, and the enemy do have a force inside the town. But that's only the beginning of the problem actually, because at the start of the next turn, after not much happened, we get desertion. So here's me learning how this crusade thing actually works. Our men have worked out that while I said we're joining the crusade just for the memes, we're actually not doing it, and they're deserting the army as a result. We lose our Crusader sergeants and some spear militia, so we're now severely weakened with only a few bits of trash infantry, which is not very good for a settlement assault where our heavy cav will be less useful. Very bad indeed. I decided to try and get ourselves out of the crusade no matter the consequences. You can do this with your generals. You can take the generals off crusade mode. The problem is the troops remain on crusade mode, and all this does, in retrospect, is mean they want to switch to a new general who is in crusade mode and just makes them even more deserterous. So not very useful. We've got a couple more inconveniences at the start of the next turn. First, our two big allies have declared war on each other, so we have to make some sort of decision. It's never clear what you're doing here. You get two buttons, accept or decline. You have to really read the small print carefully to work out what you're agreeing to here. What I'm trying to get is to not be at war with either of them. That's what we want. So I'm going to break my alliance to the Byzantines, keep my alliance to the Seljuks, and not partake in the war. Here's some more bad news though. Our king has died. That's bad, firstly, because we lose a massive unit of heavy cavalry that was on the front lines. Not very useful. But also the fact that our king had really high stats and is going to be replaced by some loser isn't going to help very much either. When it comes to desertion, our men have worked out that all of our generals have given up on the crusade and they're considering leaving, but they didn't leave this turn, so we are still somewhat intact. That's good. Here's me looking up who the new leader is. It's King John. He really sucks. He has super low authority. That means that armies that aren't led by a general can just become rebels at any time. I've had plenty of trouble with that in Medieval 2 in the past. And it also means characters with low loyalty might become rebels as well, so you can even lose your generals. There are ways to increase authority, but for now we're going to be in a precarious situation. So very bad job from our king going and dying of old age, as I think he did. Anyway, we're going to have to just deal with that. And what we want to do first and foremost is actually make the attack that we're setting up for right here. I've spent 2 turns getting siege equipment, so we've got quite a lot of stuff. And of course we want to attack before our men work out what's going on and fully desert, which might happen next turn. So we're going to charge in and just get them killed instead, making this attack. Many of our troops have been replaced with trash recruited from Gaza and Kerak, so our army's not very good anymore, but it's still as good as the enemy's. They did have some ranged weapons, some siege stuff, catapults and ballistas inside the town. Potentially they could damage our siege towers and take them out. Handily enough, they didn't really try to do that, so it was okay. We're making an attack with 2 siege towers from the north and a ram, but the ram actually ran into some trouble because the enemy did a rather clever tactic. They opened the gates just before we arrived and attacked the crew, so the ram didn't finish its journey. And that crew actually is in trouble because they do suck, and the enemy's light cav might be enough to beat them. We're also attacking with ladders there in the west, a currently uncontested climb. This siege tower is going to be quite contested. The enemy is setting up to stop us. I'm trying to move my heavy cav to deal with the light cav over with the ram situation. And I've got my heavy foot soldiers, the knights, using a siege tower uncontested over where those ballistas are. So the troops that went up on the west wall are sort of being contested. The enemy are setting up ready to stop them after I finish the climb. So that means they're not going to be very useful to us going forwards because they'll just get stuck there. The battle around the ram is going to go okay because we defeat the enemy's cav and we can start pushing into the gatehouse in order to cheekily capture it. So we just need to get our men to press forwards and cross the arbitrary point where that happens, and then we won't need the ram and things will be okay after all. With the contested siege tower, I realised after the men have deployed that it was javelinmen that were in that siege tower, so I attacked with my skirmishing unit and kept my melee units in reserve, purely just because I wasn't paying attention. That's just me being bad. No wisdom behind that whatsoever, of course. Anyway, as I mentioned, that whole gate capturing thing did happen, so our heavy cav are now into the town and we can use them to charge out and kill the enemy's catapults, which are dithering about in the town centre. We do have some trouble though, because the enemy general was waiting just beside the gate, and my jav cav, who had orders to throw jabs at him, end up getting into melee because they have to round the gates to get line of sight. That didn't go very well, and they get killed very rapidly indeed. We're now going to try and withdraw them to keep a few alive for later, and run away from that enemy general because our own troops nearby will probably lose to him as well. Our knights are chasing down the ballista which is running away from us down the east side of town, so they'll just keep going. Meanwhile, we have now got our men to the centre and we're taking out those catapults, and I've got 1 infantry unit on the way. The problem is everything all over the place is now coming back towards the centre to defend it, and we're going to be quite severely outnumbered. Lots of my troops are still outside, as you can see, and I'm now just deploying the reserves to begin a more serious attack down the west wall of the city. I also need the troops who are already on the west wall to go support my javs who are stuck in combat over by that siege tower. Anyway, back in the centre, it's quickly obvious that we're going to be overwhelmed here, so I'm going to have my Syrian auxiliaries just sacrifice themselves to fight the enemy while my general escapes. And even if the general is pursued here, it's not so bad because he can kite enemies around the town and help out. But luckily, they didn't chase him. Or not necessarily luckily, because what they did was just sit in the town centre, and that's not ideal for us. Now they're unroutable. We'll have to fight to the death to kill them, and we don't necessarily have the strength to do that, because our men will rout in those engagements. Seeing that, I decided to just take my time and try to come up with something. We still need to sort out that siege tower situation, so if the enemy are content to sit in the middle, we can ignore them and gradually wipe out the units that are still elsewhere in the town here. I'm reinforcing with the men who went up on the original set of ladders to help those jabs, and that ends up going okay. Here we are a bit later now, just in a standoff, because I don't know how to attack the centre in an efficient way. They have some archers who are firing out, that's why all my men are in weird positions around corners to try and get out of their line of sight. However, the enemy actually sent some cav out to attack one of my hidden groups here, and that's okay for us really, because now we're just going to hit them from both sides with a load of heavy troops, who should be able to win against those light cav. The only risk is that the enemy will see this and bring more things over, because altogether they probably could beat our small group there. Handily enough, they don't, so it's just going to be these men against the light cav. There's still the risk that the general will die, which I was quite paranoid about, but in this case, we are going to get lucky. He doesn't die fighting these light cav, and the light cav are easily wiped out by the dismounted knights, and the mounted knights in fact. So we take them down, nothing else comes out, and that's alright. But then afterwards I started thinking, well, we actually want more things to come out. We want one unit to keep coming out and being ambushed around the corner. So I tried this new tactic. The survivors from the skirmish cav we saw getting killed earlier sneak over towards the centre, poke their heads around this corner, and throw some jabs towards the enemy general standing here. His men are just tanking those jabs pretty well, but they don't have shields, so they should be vulnerable to ranged fire. Anyway, after a while, this kind of wakes the enemy up. Some of their archers who were stuck clipping into some catapults unclip and start firing at my men who are gradually walking towards them. I'm going to charge in response and get things going, and the enemy appears to agree. Their men are suddenly charging all over the place, including their general, who is pursuing my skirmish cav, so I'm going to lure them back towards that trap with the knights, while the rest of my men will advance ready to attack the centre. The luring manoeuvre works pretty well because the Jav Cav kill a whole load of the bodyguards by throwing jabs backwards as they run. A few of my Jav Cav died as well, but that doesn't matter very much. And soon enough we've got the enemy general over here, and now we want to try and engage him mainly with the dismounted knights. My own general, who's basically dead, doesn't want to partake in this fight because he'll probably get finished off. So we'll see what our dismounted guys can do. They do have really high combat stats, so that will overcome General's bodyguards being strong against everything. And in the centre, things are going perfectly. As you can see, the enemy units are leaving the town square to attack my groups before they arrive. That means we can rout the enemy. Therefore, the fact that we have roughly the same troops won't work to the enemy's advantage, because they'll rout and we'll kill a bunch of them as they go. And that means the fight to the death in the end should be much easier. Plus, one of the entrances was only defended by some ballista crew, so I was able to break into the town centre early on. The fight with the general is going well. We've almost got him killed there. And as I said, I got into the town centre with enough men that we can start surrounding the other groups. There's only really two groups there and some archers who are fighting in the centre. Here I've got some jabs, so we're going to throw right into the back of these enemy spears. Nice and juicy. I think the jabs are unpowerful enough that charging in melee might have been the better option to try and just rout the enemy. But whatever, soon enough the enemy general dies in that fight, and that's certainly going to get the enemy routing. We're going to have them surrounded and severely outnumbered. That balance bar's looking pretty good. Now we can finish them off, and because the enemy did move out of the town centre, there's no last stand grind where we're going to lose a couple of hundred men just finishing off the enemy because we have to kill all of them. In fact, there we go, we can end the battle because everything was routing at once. A clear victory. We still lost half our men, even with that really lucky and good ending to the fight. So that was a little bit iffy, but it worked out in the end. Our army's now officially gone, so we'll have to rely on trash going forwards until we can get the proper recruitment buildings going. But the Fatamids are in trouble. We've taken down their frontline armies, and we are now getting to the point where we're going to be able to recruit some more stuff ourselves and maybe defend these settlements a little bit better, so it's looking good. There's still this crusading issue to deal with though, and I thought what I'll do here is take the nearly dead general leading this force and say, right, you are going to be our crusade man. So all the troops who want to go on crusade, because I said I would let them go earlier, will go off with this guy on a magical quest. I thought though, looking at the strategy map, the route to Alexandria is pretty clear. We actually can go on this crusade, and because Alexandria looks really ungarrisoned, we might even be able to actually do it. We could actually pull through on our own organisation of this crusade and go on it ourselves and finish the job. But then I randomly found this. I was sending a diplomat to the west, and apparently there's a massive Polish army just sitting near Cairo. No idea how they got there, but it looks like someone else is taking the crusade pretty seriously, so they're probably going to go to Alexandria next and finish things off. That means we don't have to worry, but we still have to walk towards Alexandria so that our men will think we're going on the crusade and won't desert. So we'll try and keep the con going. It lasted all of about one turn, although it didn't get ruined because of the crusade thing. I think the general leading that little crusading army has just rebelled, probably because of our king's low authority or his low loyalty, or perhaps both, meaning that all of the crusading troops are now part of the rebel army and are lost to us anyway. So that didn't go very well. He's just going to stand there now. I usually ignore rebels because I don't want to waste troops fighting them, and normally they're not very aggressive, they just kind of stand there. So we'll let him stand there. I wanted to see if he had low loyalty. Apparently he has high loyalty here, but I think that might be because when a general becomes a rebel their stats change, because this guy definitely didn't have that high command. He had like 2 stars of command before, so I think he's just found himself out there, and now he's really loyal and really good at military stuff, but only on his own. Looks like things are going well with the crusade though. The Polish are there, and also the Leonese have arrived by ship and set Alexandria to siege all of a sudden. But it does look like a Fatimid army is coming our way from the southeast. We don't really have the troops to defend against it right now, but we are at a point now in the campaign where recruiting things is possible. For example, here in Jerusalem, I've got the Knights Templar recruiting building, so we can recruit mounted and foot knights, nice powerful units. We're starting to roll up and get some heavy stuff onto the field, and more will be coming. Luckily for us, the Fatamids don't seem particularly interested in continuing that push they started. Their army doesn't advance towards us. That's going to make life very easy, because now we have quite a substantial force defending, since I moved over the force that was defending Gaza and have recruited new things. Also, the crusade is over. The Leonese successfully took Alexandria, and my first priority is to go right to the Fatimids and ask for peace. I couldn't get it before because we're forced to be at war during the crusade, but now that it's gone, I thought let's try and end the war, because we'll still benefit from a ceasefire. We can build up even more and get some proper armies together and then just come back and stomp them. They weren't interested, so what I have to do is now give them some money to get around the weird AI glitch or oversight where they'll always refuse your second deal. So now we're back technically to the first deal because they've accepted a gift, but they refused even with me offering them tons of cash in exchange for the ceasefire. It's not happening, the war will continue. But yes, you can see my main force here is now quite big because I've pulled over all the units I've recruited recently into one force. Plus, the Fatimids still don't attack me going through the next turn. I really thought they would. Another thing I've been doing, by the way, is accepting all the generals I can. So we've got generals all over the place at this stage, and really it's like my primary method of recruitment is just recruiting generals to get their bodyguards since they're such good units. So now we've got 4 generals in our frontline army, that's not bad at all, giving them tons of heavy cav, and 4 or 5 units of regular heavy cav recruited from Jerusalem and Damascus. I think a couple of our cities now have the ability to recruit knights, so I got quite a few units together and rushed them down. And all things together, we have quite a substantial army here, and I felt very confident just going out to fight the Fatimids who were just standing here. Now that we see their force, things are looking quite good. They've got tons of spears and tons of archers, but only their general for cav, whereas we have basically tons of cav. So the enemy will have the infantry and ranged advantage perhaps, but the cavalry advantage is ours, and cavalry beats ranged and infantry in this game. There was a massive delay while I got into position, but basically I'm sending half the cav one way, half the cav the other, and everything else up the centre as a distraction. As I was coming up on the left, the enemy did send a few units to engage my cav out here for some reason, separating them from the main army. That's great because they'll be screwed if the fights actually start, and finally they do. Their horse archers are caught up against the edge of the map. The other two units are just archers coming at us, not really sure what the plan here is, but all we need to do is run at them with these Crusader knights, and bang, those archers are in trouble and they didn't manage to fire any volleys. Gonna use my general there to take down those desert cav against the edge of the map, and basically that whole scenario resolved itself quite well. On the other side of the enemy army, something similar is happening. Some spears are coming out to challenge my other main group of cav. A frontal charge is all it's going to take to bring them down. However, the rough terrain isn't helping us here. You can see our knights kind of get stuck on all the rocks and they just stop. So even though the enemy actually turned around and started running, we would have absolutely annihilated them with a full charge. The charge didn't happen at all, and that's a big shame. However, we still outclassed the enemy in a straight melee, so I just left my men to fight them. Meanwhile, need to micro the main fight because the two armies are now pretty much in range of each other, and because the enemy have tons of archers, we don't want to just stand there, we want to charge in even though it's uphill, and just get the enemy fighting, since once they're facing that direction, the cav who have finished off the enemy's little group over on our left will now swoop in from behind and start doing massive damage. On the right, I'm being a bit more careful, trying to kite enemy units away. In particular, trying to steer clear of the enemy's general. That's a unit that actually could threaten our cavalry units. It's fine for them to just be standing out there and being kited though, so this is helping out a lot. And the main fight is just an absolute slaughter. Enemy units are scattered all over the place. Some of them are skirmishing, some of them are routing. In fact, a lot of them are skirmishing right now because they had so many archers, so it's not quite as good as it looks with the enemy running all over the place. But soon our men will catch up and kill them. And the enemy general was being really passive, which helped out a lot. You can see him there at the back, just wandering past our men and not engaging them. That's so helpful. We're just constantly going this way and that and killing all of the regular troops and not engaging their only good unit. This way we're going to preserve our manpower as much as possible. After a while, we've killed so much stuff that the enemy army rout, and that was just as the enemy general went into the fight and started annihilating our foot knights. So yes, it basically went perfectly. And now that everything's routing, we need to chase them down to get the magic number. And the enemy general is their prince, I think, their newest prince. So we definitely want to chase him down and get the kill, and eventually we do. We've also got what we need, so we can end the battle right there. This is a big victory. We lost only under 100 men, the enemy losing 2,000, and of course this secures our road to go on and attack their next settlement, which is currently basically unguarded. All looking really good. The only way the enemy can come back from this one is to pay tons of money in ransom. If I offer the ransom, I was going to execute, because execute's the correct thing to do in this situation, but I wanted to be nice, because your decisions there influence your morality a little bit. And I thought maybe our king should be a nice guy because we want to get in with the Pope and stuff. Right now he's a little bit evil, but he's basically neutral. So if we release loads of prisoners and stuff, he'd be considered a good person. Maybe if we have low taxes as well and things like that. I'm not sure what effect it actually has, whether you go the Paragon or Renegade route, but yes, we're going to roleplay Paragon just because we're trying to pretend we're doing the right thing with this whole crusade, of course. Anyway, so that's a big victory, and we should be able to follow up on that with some nice territorial captures. We'll get into that next time.